Welcome to ServiceNet Spotlight. I'm Amy Swisher, Vice President of Community Relations, and your host for this program where we feature the people and the programs that are making a difference in people's lives every day throughout Western Massachusetts. After a violent incident happens in a community, the discussion often turns to mental health, and that's usually focused on the person who has perpetrated the crime. But what about the mental health of the people who were affected? Jim Frutkin is ServiceNet's Vice President of Business Strategy, Development, and Innovation, and he has worked with a variety of groups on critical stress debriefing, which is what we'll be focusing on today. While Jim has a senior management role with the agency, he's also a skilled clinician with a solid background in crisis management. And over the years, he's helped people deal with the aftermath of violence in many, many different situations, from hospital emergency rooms to schools, to the community of Sandy Hook, Connecticut, which had the tragic situation in December 2012. Jim went down after that to work with the folks there. So, welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. And also thank you for the important work you do and have done over the years in this field. It's so important. How do you even begin? When you were, and I mentioned the ER, I mentioned schools, I mentioned Sandy Hook. How do you even begin a discussion when you're going into a situation? It's never quite the same as the last one was, but how do you start?
Well, I try to actually, when I'm dealing with groups as versus to individuals, I try to really understand this, things from their point of view and what did they experience. And so then what are they going to need from me in order to make progress and get their lives back in that sort of way. So I put myself in their place, and then I apply a lot of knowledge that I've had the benefit of learning throughout my work here at ServiceNet. And part of that, I've really just learned to trust the resiliency of folks. Sometimes it's very surprising how much, how people can recover from extremely serious situations.
You also, we were talking earlier, you talked about the authority figure or the not the authority figure, and I was intrigued by that. Can you go into that?
Yeah, I think what I've learned over time, and again, each situation is a little bit different, is that what's not going to be helpful is to come in and be distant and be academic in a sense. At the same time, if you come in, you need to, if people are going to trust your ability to help them, then you've got to show some leadership at the same time. So I find it's a balance between coming in and not necessarily expressing clear expectations per se, but at the same time inspiring confidence that you know what you're doing so that you can help them through this situation.
So instead of saying this is the formula and this is what I'm going to do with you and to you,
right.
You're listening, you're hearing them, and you need to establish some credibility.
Exactly.
Let's take a moment to do some of that establishing, because I know you've had I mentioned you had a solid background in dealing with this kind of thing, and it spans a lot of years and a lot of different situations, but what have been some of your key learning moments?
Well, one of them we were talking earlier that I've learned a lot from. We, many years ago, ran a program in collaboration with Brattleboro Retreat Hospital for severely traumatized women. And so these are women it was a privately funded program, so they came from all over the United States to Northampton. So they didn't live here, they didn't have roots here. They were traumatized in extreme sorts of ways. So there were folks who were in psychogenic fugue states. Back then, diagnosis was referred to as multiple personality disorder. And they would come to this strange place, and we created a meaningful day for them, a meaningful program for them. We only got to work with them 4, 6, I guess maybe in extreme situations 8 weeks, so you didn't always see the huge amount of progress in, for them, what was a relatively brief period of time. But then over the years, I have had experience of connecting. Well, they've reached out to me decades, literally, after they were in the program, and have meaningful lives today. And you would sort of almost be in disbelief in some situations in terms of, so I've learned from them that you can come from very deep places and get your life back.
And trauma is a deep place.
Absolutely.
However we experience it, and with whatever degree of health or mental health or issues with mental health. So it sounds like, I mean, I know one of the things you talked about is acknowledging where people are, what the challenges are that they are facing. And do you come up against, this is just more than I can handle, I just can't handle this. What do you do when someone says, I don't know how I'll ever get through it?
Well, I mean, in the situations I've been, two different types of situations. One would be coming in and trying to help a group, and then what you're doing there is keeping the unity of the group together, working. And then if somebody is in a situation that you just described, then we're going to get them individual help.
Sure.
And so that would be, intensive individual therapy or whatever might be needed given the specific situation. So when somebody, the answer I would give when somebody is talking about that is then we need to get you involved in some intensive treatment. And that would be a little different than what I would do with the group per se. My job with the group would be, because sometimes after an incident like this it takes weeks, sometimes even a month or two before somebody might really respond.
And also might feel like they're, they've got those strengths in them that they've always had, but perhaps for a little time lost sight of them because of the trauma.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, usually in those situations, there's not usually, always in those situations, there's a system of care that's ready to help with them. And the job here is to figure out who needs what as time goes by. And people, as you could imagine, come into these situations with a wide range of different levels of resilience, experience, et cetera, et cetera. And so each person is a situation unto themselves, really.
Well, and
unique.
when you're working in a hospital ER, for instance, you may be working with doctors, nurses, professional staff who have seen trauma time after time, but then an incident happens that is particularly out of the ordinary and distressing. And I'm wanting to get around to Sandy Hook because that, as we've talked about community violence, we've talked about how communities as a whole are working with this. I think it's interesting to look at that time. It's only 5 years ago that it happened, or it's all of 5 years ago, and a lot has happened since.
Yes.
But when you were called down there, you were working specifically with first responders.
I was one of the people working with first. There was a group of us, but yes,
Sure,
I was working with first responders. Yes, my job.
Group. And so, what were you charged to do, and how did you go about formulating a response?
I was asked to work with a small group of about 20 or so individuals. There was a team of us that went down, but then we broke down into groups. So I was with this 20. And I was a little overwhelmed, as you could imagine, given what had happened in terms of thinking what this would be like. And I just thought that what made most sense to do was that balance we referred to earlier, which was to look at what strengths they could bring in to bolster their resilience. And so what I thought of is it's a small town. They all know each other, and they trust each other. So when I got into the group situation, a thing I sometimes have said in the past, but was particularly true in this situation, which is there's no manual that is going to tell you what you should do and how you should respond to this situation. What you've been through, you folks, is extraordinary, over the top, but we're going to get through it together. And I said, you're all going to know if one another's not themselves on a day-to-day basis as we go forward, because you work with each other, your kids play together, etc. And they acknowledged that. And once I sort of got the sense that I had assessed that accurately, we broke up into, I had them count up, but we broke up into small groups of 4 or 5 people, and they were in charge of supporting each other during the week. Now, we met weekly, and we had the capacity to communicate 24/7, literally, for a period of time.
You gave him your cell phone number.
I gave him my cell phone number. So if somebody needed something immediately, and then we had, in Connecticut, we had resources ready to go in case somebody had a crisis at 2 in the morning or whatever it might be. So things were all pretty well set up. But that was the way, and they supported each other. There were people that needed, more intensive individual treatment, but there were a number of people that the group process really was what they needed to just sort of get through it. There's no magic formula, no, clearly defined. It's like, they need to make that judgment themselves.
There's no magic formula, but I think when we were discussing this at other times, you talked about having them count off 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's a very different situation, or a very different kind of tone that you set, where folks who are in first responder mode might be used to that.
Well,
so
I think,
it's
they were
a small thing, but it's
I mean,
big.
it was sort of the military kind of, where that type of discipline that I thought was comfortable for them.
And as you said
Might not be
earlier,
for other folks, but
building
it
on
was-
their strengths.
Yeah.
Saying, where are you strong, where can you support each other?
Yeah.
You're people who support people, how do you now support each other?
Right.
Yeah. Well, Jim, these are all incredibly important life lessons. I also, I just wanted to get to this because
Yeah.
I thought this term was great that you've mentioned to me, and that was fierce caring.
Mhm.
And that, especially when I'm thinking first responders, fierce caring it's not just soft in approach. It's, I'm here for you, I'm standing with you, I won't let you go, you're not going to fall off this ladder, whatever the situation.
Well, I learned that in that residential program I had mentioned earlier, and all the work that I've done at ServiceNet and its predecessor Valley programs back in the day, where vulnerable people, there is something where if you really can demonstrate that you are what you say and are not going to, so in that program for women that I had described earlier, for example, I took 1 day off a week, but for 6 days a week I met with them each twice a day, at the beginning and the end of the day. It wasn't wizardly clinical work. It was sort of like, he's going to ask me what I'm supposed to do today. He's going to make sure I do it, and then at 5 o'clock he's going to see if I did it. I better do it. Oh my God, I might have got better, kind of thing. But that caring,
Sure.
that would be a way that I think that was expressed to them. And what I've heard in the few people that have reached out to me in the years past, that in fact was something that even after decades they didn't forget, apparently.
So what I hear is respect each other,
Mhm.
listen, build on strengths, value community, be there for each other through thick and thin.
And I think having some sense that, and in these situations, I would also say that in the different situations, the systems of care that were supporting what I was doing were really ready to commit significant resources to whatever might be needed. So it helps a lot when you go into those situations knowing that you have pretty much unlimited resources to back you up. So if somebody needed something, it wasn't like go call and make an appointment. It was like, we will get that within an hour kind of thing. And so the companies that were in charge of providing these services really understood that, at least. And so it helps when you go in to know that it's really true.
Well, and it's all good to know. And
Yeah.
it's all good to think on these things, whether we're dealing with major trauma or small
Mhm.
conflicts in our lives. But I thank you so much for shedding light on it, for doing the work you do, and for being with us today.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
What makes ServiceNet's team so special is we value each other. It creates really a welcoming environment. The most rewarding thing about working in this field is definitely seeing the resiliency of all of the people that walk through our doors. That's what makes it for me.
Katrina Manegio, our Director of Autism Services, is here today to talk about the ways she and her staff support parents and other members of the family of a child who has been diagnosed with characteristics of autism. ServiceNet's autism program works with children from birth to age 9 in Franklin, Hampshire, and Hampden counties, and also the North Quabbin area. Welcome, Katrina.
Thank
So
you.
glad you could be with us. And let's start by talking, I mentioned parents and families, but talk about your program's philosophy when it comes to the role of parents and families in the overall care plan for the child.
We really believe strongly in working with every child, every parent, every family member